Most wars are first understood through explosions, missiles, airstrikes, casualty numbers, but that is not where the deeper story begins. The deeper story begins with infrastructure. The Persian Gulf is not just a body of water on a map. It is one of the most concentrated strategic corridors in the modern world. A huge share of the global economy depends on what moves through this region, what is stored around it, and what can be interrupted inside it. That is why conflict here rarely stays local. The Gulf connects production, transport, finance, and political power in one tight system. Oil fields feed export terminals feed tankers, tankers move through narrow sea lanes. Sea lanes connect to refineries, power systems, airlines, food supply chains, and industrial production far beyond the Middle East. In other words, the Gulf is not important because it is dramatic. It is important because it is connected, and connected systems are vulnerable in a very specific way. You do not always have to destroy them. Sometimes you only need to make them uncertain. That is what makes the Strait of Hormuz so important. It is not just a passage. It is a pressure point. A narrow channel can carry an enormous amount of global consequence. When a major share of traded oil moves through one constrained route, disruption becomes leverage. That leverage does not require total closure. Even partial danger can be enough. A tanker captain does not need to see a ship sink to change course. An insurer does not need a full blockade to raise rates. A commodities market does not wait for perfect confirmation before reacting. Risk alone begins to move behavior. And when behavior changes across many actors at once, the economic impact can spread much faster than physical damage. This is why the Gulf operates like a system under tension. Every port, radar network, refinery, shipping lane, airport, and naval patrol is part of a wider structure of trust. Trade depends on the belief that routes will remain open, schedules will hold, and threats will stay manageable. Once that belief weakens, friction enters the system. Ships slow down, flights reroute. Prices rise, governments intervene, military deployments expand. That is how a regional war starts generating global consequences without ever becoming a world war in the formal sense. The critical point is this: modern conflict is no longer measured only by territory seized or targets destroyed. It is also measured by how much stress one side can inject into the systems that hold daily life together. In the Gulf, those systems are unusually dense. Energy flows through them. Trade flows through them. Confidence flows through them. So when pressure begins there, the world does not simply watch the region. The world starts absorbing the shock. And that is the real starting point of this war, not the first strike, but the architecture that made every strike matter far beyond the battlefield. To understand what happens next, we first have to understand how disruption becomes strategy. When people think about war, they usually imagine armies. But in the modern world, pressure often travels through markets, and markets react to risk faster than missiles travel. In the Persian Gulf, the most sensitive system is energy. Oil does not simply power cars. It fuels aviation, shipping, manufacturing, agriculture, and electricity systems across the world. When energy supply becomes uncertain, the effects move quickly through the global economy. That is why control over energy routes can become a strategic tool, not necessarily through total shutdowns, but through calculated disruption. The Strait of Hormuz illustrates this perfectly. It is a narrow maritime corridor connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. Tankers carrying crude oil, refined fuel, and chemical products pass through it every day. The corridor may look small on a map, but the volume moving through it is enormous. Because of that, even a limited threat can change behavior. If ship operators believe a route has become dangerous, they begin to reconsider their options. Some vessels delay departure. Others take longer routes. Insurance providers adjust their risk models and raise premiums. Security escorts become necessary. Each of these changes adds cost and time. And when thousands of shipments are affected, the entire supply chain feels the pressure. This is where disruption becomes economic leverage. The goal is not always to stop every ship. That would require overwhelming military control. Instead, the goal can be to introduce uncertainty into the system. If enough uncertainty exists, the market itself begins to amplify the disruption. Oil traders react to perceived shortages. Energy companies adjust delivery expectations. Governments begin discussing emergency reserves. In other words, a regional conflict starts influencing global prices. Energy markets are particularly sensitive because they operate on expectations. Traders are constantly trying to estimate future supply and demand. If conflict threatens a key production region or transport corridor, the market price may rise long before any actual shortage appears. That reaction can travel very quickly. Higher oil prices increase transportation costs. Airlines pay more for fuel. Shipping companies pass costs to customers. Farmers face higher fertilizer and diesel expenses. Food prices can climb as logistics become more expensive. The chain reaction spreads through everyday economic life, but disruption does not affect energy alone. Shipping insurance is another critical pressure point. When a sea lane becomes risky, insurers classify it as a high-threat zone. Premiums increase sharply. Some companies may refuse coverage altogether unless vessels adopt strict security procedures. That changes the cost structure of global trade. A cargo route that was profitable last week may suddenly become expensive enough to reconsider. And because modern trade networks depend on speed and reliability, delays can ripple across multiple industries at once. Ports become congested, tankers queue offshore, delivery schedules shift. What begins as a localized conflict gradually becomes a global logistics problem. This is why economic disruption can be strategically powerful. It forces distant actors to feel the consequences of a war they are not directly fighting. Consumers notice higher fuel prices. Industries face uncertain supply. Governments start calculating economic risk alongside military risk. And when economic pressure spreads across many countries, diplomatic pressure often follows. That is the hidden battlefield behind many modern conflicts. Not the territory captured, but the cost imposed. Because in a connected global economy, disruption itself can become a weapon. But economic pressure is only one layer of the system. The conflict itself is expanding across several different domains at the same time. In earlier centuries, wars were usually defined by a single battlefield. Armies met, territory changed hands. Victory was measured by who controlled the ground. Modern conflicts rarely follow that pattern. Instead, they unfold across multiple domains at the same time: airspace, sea lanes, digital networks, financial systems. And sometimes proxy forces operating far from the original battlefield. This is known as multi-domain escalation. The idea is simple. Pressure does not come from one direction. It comes from several directions simultaneously. Each domain amplifies the others. Air power is often the fastest layer. Aircraft and long-range weapons allow states to strike targets hundreds or thousands of kilometers away. Air campaigns are designed to damage military infrastructure, command networks, and logistics systems. They can also signal technological dominance, showing that one side can reach almost any target it chooses. But air power alone rarely decides a conflict. That is where maritime operations enter the picture. Naval forces do more than fight ships. They protect shipping routes, escort commercial vessels, hunt for mines, and control critical choke points. When naval operations intensify, commercial traffic begins to feel the pressure. Shipping companies monitor naval warnings closely. Even a small number of incidents can trigger rerouting decisions across entire fleets. This turns maritime security into a central factor of the war. Then there is the role of unmanned systems. Drones have transformed modern conflict. They are relatively inexpensive compared to aircraft or missiles, yet they can reach distant targets with precision. They can also operate in large numbers. Because of this, drones introduce uncertainty into airspace and infrastructure security. An airport, a refinery, or a radar site may suddenly become vulnerable to a weapon that costs far less than the systems defending against it. The psychological impact can be as important as the physical damage. A successful drone strike sends a message. Even protected infrastructure may not be fully secure. Proxy forces represent another domain of escalation. These are armed groups aligned with a state, but operating outside its official military structure. They may be located in neighboring countries or along contested borders. Their actions expand the geography of the conflict without formally opening a new war front. Rocket fire, cross-border strikes, and localized clashes can spread instability across several regions at once. This forces military planners to divide attention. Instead of focusing on one front, they must monitor many. But escalation does not stop at physical attacks. Financial systems can also become targets. Banks, payment networks, and financial hubs represent another layer of vulnerability in the modern global system. If financial infrastructure becomes unstable, trade, financing, and investment flows can be affected. Even the threat of financial disruption can create anxiety in regional markets. And when several domains are active at the same time, air, sea, proxies, and finance, the conflict becomes harder to contain. Each layer increases uncertainty. Each action creates new reactions. Military planners must consider logistics, supply chains, political responses, and economic stability all at once. This complexity is a defining feature of modern warfare. Victory is no longer just about battlefield strength. It is about managing pressure across multiple interconnected systems. The side that adapts faster, protects its networks better, and sustains pressure longer may gain the strategic advantage. But the more domains become involved, the greater the risk that unintended consequences will spread beyond the original conflict zone. And that brings us to the final layer of the story: Because when several global systems begin to absorb the shock of a war, the consequences no longer remain regional. They become international. In the final part, we step back and examine what happens when the global system itself begins to feel the strain. When multiple domains of conflict collide with global infrastructure, the effects begin to spread far beyond the battlefield. At first, the changes may look small: a delayed tanker, a rerouted flight, a slight increase in energy prices. But modern global systems are tightly synchronized. Small disruptions, when repeated across many routes and industries, can build into much larger pressures. Energy markets are usually the first place where this pressure becomes visible. Oil is traded globally, and the market reacts not only to current supply, but also to expectations about future supply. When conflict threatens a region responsible for a significant share of global energy flows, traders begin adjusting their forecasts. Prices move. Companies reconsider storage levels. Governments start calculating whether emergency reserves might be needed. Strategic oil reserves exist for exactly this reason. Many countries maintain stockpiles designed to stabilize markets during sudden supply shocks. When tensions rise, releasing some of those reserves can calm markets by signaling that supply shortages will be temporary. The goal is not to replace all disrupted oil flows. The goal is to buy time. Time for shipping routes to stabilize. Time for diplomatic negotiations to progress. Time for markets to regain confidence. Confidence is an often overlooked component of global infrastructure. Trade, finance, and logistics operate smoothly only when participants believe that disruptions will remain limited. Once confidence weakens, systems begin slowing down. Airspace offers another example. The Middle East sits at the crossroads of several major intercontinental flight corridors. Airlines connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa frequently pass through this region. When conflict intensifies, aviation authorities must reassess risk.